The barn is being seized for historic preservation. We'll begin relocating its contents next week for the Veterans Memorial Museum, declared Director Caldwell, sliding an official-looking document across the kitchen table. Her crisp, navy blazer stood in stark contrast to the farmhouse's rustic interior as she watched Michael Peterson's face transform from confusion to dismay. Michael had inherited his grandfather's rural property just 6 weeks ago, the weathered barn and farmhouse nestled on 40 acres of rolling Kentucky countryside. He'd barely begun sorting through decades of accumulated belongings when officials arrived with their bombshell announcement. Now he was learning that his grandfather's seemingly ordinary barn concealed secrets that powerful people in Riverview County considered too historically significant to remain in private hands. "There must be some mistake," Michael protested, scanning the document with growing alarm. "This barn has been in my family for generations. My grandfather William was just a farmer." Caldwell's professionally neutral expression didn't waver. "Your grandfather's military service record suggests otherwise, Mr. Peterson. The Veterans Historical Society has reason to believe that your barn contains artifacts of exceptional significance to American military history. The county has approved our petition for preservation rights. You can't just take someone's property," Sarah Chen interjected, Michael's fiancée placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We've only just started going through William's belongings." "I understand this is difficult," Caldwell responded, though her tone suggested limited patience, "but the historical value here transcends private ownership. We've secured funding from the Riverview Historical Foundation to ensure these artifacts receive proper preservation." Michael stared out the kitchen window at the massive red barn that had stood on this land since before his birth. His grandfather, William, had always been protective of it, maintaining the structure meticulously even as his health declined. Michael had countless childhood memories of helping with minor repairs, but William had always handled certain areas himself, particularly the old grain storage section that remained perpetually locked. "What exactly do you think is in there?" Michael asked, turning back to Caldwell. "Documentation and artifacts related to Operation Blackbird," she replied, watching closely for his reaction. "I assume you're familiar with it." Michael shook his head. "Grandpa didn't talk much about his military service. I knew he served in World War II, but he kept those memories to himself." A flicker of surprise crossed Caldwell's face before her professional mask returned. "Perhaps there's more to discuss than I realized. The museum will send a team on Monday to begin cataloging and preparing for relocation. We'll need full access to the barn, particularly the northern section." After Caldwell departed, Michael sank into his grandfather's worn leather armchair, the property seizure notice still clutched in his hand. "This is insane. They can't just show up and claim Grandpa's barn contains some kind of historical treasure trove without explanation." Sarah, an architectural preservationist by profession, was already researching on her laptop. "Operation Blackbird doesn't appear in any public military databases," she reported after several minutes. "But there are references to it in declassified document indexes, something to do with intelligence operations in the European theater." "Grandpa was just a farm boy from Kentucky who got drafted," Michael insisted. "He came home, took over the family farm, and lived a quiet life. What could he possibly have that would interest a museum?" Sarah closed her laptop with a determined click. "There's only one way to find out. We need to see what's in that locked section of the barn before the museum people arrive on Monday." The sprawling red barn had weathered countless seasons. Its paint faded, but its structure still solid, thanks to William Peterson's meticulous maintenance. As dusk approached, Michael located his grandfather's massive keyring in the workshop drawer where it had always been kept. "There were areas Grandpa never let me enter," Michael explained as they crossed the yard. "Said they were structurally unsound, but he was always doing maintenance work there himself. The main doors creaked open to reveal the familiar interior. Farm, equipment, workbenches, storage bins for feed, all the ordinary trappings of rural life. Michael's flashlight beam swept across the space as memories flooded back. Helping with tractor repairs, building birdhouses at the workbench, stacking hay bales in summer. The north section would be through there, he said, pointing to a padlocked door in the rear wall. That's the part that was always off limits. The heavy padlock was well oiled despite its age, another sign of his grandfather's careful maintenance. The key turned with surprising ease, the mechanism clicking open as if recently used. "That's odd," Michael murmured. "Grandpa hadn't been out to the barn in months before he passed. Someone's been keeping this lock maintained." The door swung open to reveal a room that immediately struck them as different from the rest of the barn. While the main section featured rough wood and exposed beams, this space had been finished. With smooth paneling and a proper wooden floor, metal filing cabinets lined one wall, a large workbench dominated the center, and carefully organized shelves held dozens of locked metal containers. "This doesn't look like farm storage," Sarah whispered, her flashlight beam catching what appeared to be a sophisticated lock on one of the cabinets. "What on earth was Grandpa keeping in here?" Michael wondered aloud, approaching the workbench, where a leather-bound ledger lay closed. As he reached for it, his flashlight beam caught something unusual in the floorboards, a subtle difference in the wood grain pattern. Sarah noticed it too, her preservationist's eye trained to spot architectural inconsistencies. "These boards are different," she said, kneeling to examine them more closely. "Newer, maybe, or from a different source." Michael joined her, running his hand over the section of flooring. Unlike the rest of the smooth, worn boards, these felt slightly raised. "There's a seam here," he said, fingers tracing what appeared to be a carefully disguised outline, approximately 4 feet square. Working together, they located a nearly invisible metal ring recessed into one board. When pulled, it revealed itself as a handle to a trapdoor that opened with surprising ease, as if its hinges had been recently oiled. Below lay a set of narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. Sarah's eyes widened. A hidden room beneath. A hidden room. Your grandfather was serious about keeping something secret. Michael's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness, revealing a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet square, with a low ceiling. Unlike the organized space above, this hidden room held a single object, a large vintage steamer trunk secured with multiple locks. "I've never seen this before," Michael said as they carefully descended the stairs. "Not even a hint that something like this existed." The trunk bore no markings, except for a small metal plate on its side with a series of numbers, 091045 BBO. The locks looked formidable, but as Michael examined them more closely, he noticed a small compartment concealed in the trunk's wooden frame. Inside was a key ring with 3 antique keys. "He wanted someone to find this," Sarah observed. "Otherwise, why leave the keys?" With trembling hands, Michael unlocked the trunk. As the lid creaked open, they found themselves staring at layer upon layer of carefully preserved documents, photographs, and objects. On top lay a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For my grandson, when the time comes." "He knew somebody would come looking for this," Michael whispered, carefully opening the envelope to reveal a letter written in his grandfather's distinctive flowing script. "Michael, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you've discovered what I've protected for over 70 years. I had hoped to explain everything to you personally, but some stories are difficult to tell face to face, even to those we love most. What you found isn't just my secret. It belongs to history, to the men who never came home, and to the truth that powerful people have worked decades to keep buried. In 1944, I wasn't just a farm boy in uniform. I was part of Operation Blackbird, an OSS intelligence unit tasked with tracking Nazi movement of looted cultural treasures and scientific research. What we discovered in a hidden facility near Strasbourg went beyond art theft. We found evidence of experimental technologies and research that certain American officials wanted to acquire quietly, without public knowledge or proper documentation. The records in this trunk document what really happened, the technologies we recovered, the scientists who were secretly brought to America, and the men who died to keep certain discoveries from falling into the wrong hands. These papers also prove that some of our own leaders purposely concealed these operations, not just from our enemies, but from the American people. The Riverview Historical Foundation was established by men who participated in this cover-up. For decades, they've searched for these records, knowing I smuggled them home. Their sudden interest in preserving our barn is no coincidence. Trust Professor Eleanor Martinez at State University. She's spent her career researching Operation Blackbird despite institutional resistance. The flash drive contains digitized copies of everything. Get it to her immediately. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but the truth deserves to be known, and the men who died deserve to be remembered for what they really did, not the sanitized version of history that's been presented. All my love. Grandpa Will Michael looked up from the letter, his world tilting on its axis. The kindly grandfather who taught him to fish and repair engines had been carrying this monumental secret his entire life. Look at these, Sarah said softly, carefully lifting a bundle of photographs from the trunk. They showed young men in uniform standing beside strange mechanical devices, documents with top-secret stamps, and maps with locations marked in coded notation. Beneath the photographs lay folders of documents, each meticulously organized and preserved. Operation reports, technical diagrams, personnel files. One large envelope contained what appeared to be technical specifications for devices decades ahead of their time. This is why the Foundation wants the barn, Michael realized. They must have learned Grandpa had these records. They're not preserving history. They're trying to control it. Sarah checked her watch. It's nearly midnight. If they're coming Monday, we have less than 2 days to figure out what to do. We need to get this to Professor Martinez, Michael said, locating a small waterproof case containing the flash drive his grandfather had mentioned. But first, we should document everything, just in case. They spent hours photographing each document, creating their own backup of William Peterson's meticulously preserved evidence. The more they examined, the more staggering the implications became. The documents suggested that technologies recovered during Operation Blackbird had quietly influenced American scientific development for decades, while the official records had been systematically sanitized. As dawn approached, they carefully repacked the trunk, returned it to its hidden chamber, and concealed the trapdoor. Exhausted but determined, they drove back to the farmhouse to research Professor Eleanor Martinez. She's still active at State University, Sarah confirmed after several searches. Department of Modern History, specializing in classified military operations of the Second World War. There are references to her work being controversial and challenging established narratives. Exactly the person Grandpa would trust. Michael nodded. We should contact her immediately, before they could make the call. The sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, they watched a black SUV and 2 official-looking vans approach the house. Harriet Caldwell stepped from the SUV, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit and 2 uniformed security personnel. They're early, Sarah whispered. 3 days early. Michael's jaw tightened. They're not here for preservation. They're here to make sure no one sees what's in that trunk before they can secure it. As Caldwell approached the porch, Michael quickly pocketed his grandfather's flash drive and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Follow my lead," he whispered. "We need to buy time." The battle for William Peterson's hidden legacy and the truth about Operation Blackbird was about to begin far sooner than they had anticipated. Michael opened the door before Harriet Caldwell could knock, forcing a calm he didn't feel. The museum director's surprise at their alertness quickly transformed into professional composure. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Chen, I apologize for the early arrival, but our timeline has been accelerated." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is Maxwell Thornton, chairman of the Riverview Historical Foundation. Recent developments have heightened the urgency of our preservation efforts." Thornton stepped forward, his tailored suit and manicured appearance distinctly out of place against the farmhouse backdrop. "We've received credible information that your grandfather's collection may be at risk," he announced with practiced concern. "Given the historical significance, we've secured an emergency preservation order." He extended a document that Michael reluctantly accepted. The legal language authorized immediate access and temporary custodianship of all historical artifacts and documents related to military service located on the Peterson property. "This wasn't our agreement," Michael protested, quickly scanning the document. "You said Monday. We're still inventorying Grandpa's personal effects." "The court has granted immediate access," Thornton replied smoothly. "Our team is prepared to begin work now, with all appropriate care for personal items, of course." Sarah stepped forward. "We'll need time to review this with our attorney. This is the first we're hearing of an emergency order." "Of course," Caldwell interjected with a tight smile. "However, the order is effective immediately. Our team will focus solely on the barn while you consult your attorney." Michael noticed the security personnel strategically positioning themselves between the house and barn. This wasn't a preservation team, it was an extraction operation. "I'll need to provide access," Michael said carefully. "The barn has several locked areas that my grandfather maintained for structural reasons. I'd hate for anyone to be injured due to hasty exploration." Thornton and Caldwell exchanged glances before the museum director nodded. "That would be appreciated. Mr. Peterson." As they walked toward the barn, Michael whispered to Sarah, "Call Professor Martinez. Her number's in my search history. Then contact Jim Harris. He was Grandpa's attorney." Sarah nodded slightly and turned back toward the house while Michael led the group across the yard, deliberately slowing his pace to buy time. "My grandfather was very systematic," Michael explained, unlocking the main barn doors. "Each section had specific purposes. Some areas haven't been touched in years." Inside, Thornton immediately asked, "Where's the north section?" Michael's suspicions deepened at this specific knowledge. "I need to check that the floor supports are secure before allowing a team inside. My grandfather mentioned structural concerns." "Our engineers can handle that assessment," Thornton countered, his patience visibly thinning. "With all due respect, Mr. Thornton, I'm legally responsible for any injuries on this property. I'd like to check the supports myself first." Caldwell intervened before Thornton could respond. "That's reasonable, Maxwell. Mr. Peterson, perhaps you could verify safety while our team begins documenting the main area." Michael nodded, using his grandfather's keys to unlock the padlocked door while the preservation team unloaded equipment from their vans. Once inside the finished room, he quickly assessed his options. The hidden trapdoor remained undetectable, unless you knew exactly what to look for, but a thorough search would eventually discover it. He noticed Thornton watching him intently from the doorway. "Interesting space," the Foundation chairman commented. "Not typical farm storage." "Grandpa was organized," Michael replied, kneeling to ostensibly examine the floorboards while actually confirming the trapdoor remained concealed. He converted this section for his personal projects years ago. "What kind of projects?" Thornton pressed, stepping fully into the room. "Woodworking, mostly." "He made furniture." Michael stood, gesturing toward the filing cabinets. "Those contain his design." Plans and supply inventories? Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly. Your grandfather never mentioned Operation Blackbird to you. The direct question confirmed Michael's suspicions. As I told Miss Caldwell, my grandfather rarely discussed his military service. If you're looking for something specific, perhaps you could explain what Operation Blackbird was. Before Thornton could respond, a commotion from outside drew their attention. Through the open door, Michael could see Sarah returning with an elderly man in a tweed jacket who was emphatically addressing Harriet Caldwell. "That's Jim Harris, my grandfather's attorney," Michael explained, moving quickly toward the door. Thornton followed closely behind. Outside, the attorney was examining the court order with evident displeasure. "This emergency preservation order was issued without proper notification to the property owner," Harris was saying as Michael approached. "Judge Reynolds had no business signing this without a hearing." "The historical significance justified expedited action," Caldwell maintained. Harris snorted derisively. "Margaret Reynolds's father served with Maxwell Thornton's father on the original foundation board. This hardly constitutes impartial judicial review." Michael stepped forward. "Jim, thank you for coming so quickly." The attorney turned, his weathered face softening slightly. "Michael, my boy, your grandfather would be furious about this overreach." He brandished the document. "I've already contacted Judge Harlow for an emergency stay. This document authorizes assessment and documentation only, not removal of any items without further court approval." Thornton's composure slipped momentarily. "The Historical Society has full preservation authority for documented historical artifacts," Harris interrupted. "You've yet to establish that anything here meets that criterion. Until you do, through proper channels and with Mr. Peterson's involvement, nothing leaves this property." While Thornton and Harris continued their legal sparring, Sarah discreetly showed Michael her phone screen. "Martinez driving here 2 hours." Michael nodded slightly, then addressed the group. "I propose a compromise. Your team can document and assess the main barn area today. The North Room, which appears to be my grandfather's personal workspace, will remain sealed until Monday as originally agreed, giving us time to properly inventory family items." Caldwell seemed inclined to accept this reasonable proposal. But Thornton shook his head. "The emergency order covers all structures. We have reason to believe the most significant artifacts are in that north section." "What specific artifacts?" Harris demanded. "Your order refers vaguely to military documents. If you have knowledge of specific items, that should have been detailed in your petition." Thornton's expression hardened. "The Foundation has credible intelligence regarding classified Operation Blackbird materials that William Peterson illegally removed from Europe in 1945. That's a serious accusation against a decorated veteran who can no longer defend himself," Harris responded coldly. "Do you have evidence supporting this claim?" "The evidence is precisely what we're here to secure," Thornton snapped. "Then we have a procedural problem," Harris countered. "You cannot use an emergency order to search for evidence that might exist, to support allegations that remain unproven. That's circular reasoning and legally unsound." As the confrontation escalated, Michael noticed one of the preservation team members slipping toward the barn's north section, away from the main group. "Excuse me," he called out, breaking away to intercept the man. "That area is off limits pending our agreement." The man turned, revealing a military bearing despite his civilian clothes. "Just assessing the structure's integrity," he claimed. Unconvincingly, "all preservation activities will remain in the main barn area until we resolve this," Michael insisted, positioning himself between the man and the north room door. Caldwell quickly intervened, calling the man back to the main group. "Let's focus on what we can access cooperatively," she suggested, shooting Thornton a warning glance. The standoff continued through mid-morning, with Harris maintaining that nothing could be removed while Thornton's team documented every inch of the main barn. Michael and Sarah took turns watching the north room entrance while remaining in contact with Professor Martinez, who was driving from State University. "They're methodically searching for something specific," Sarah whispered during a brief moment alone. "The preservation team has military backgrounds. I recognize standard search patterns from my work on historical military sites." Michael nodded. "They know about Operation Blackbird, but I don't think they know exactly what Grandpa had or where it's hidden. Otherwise, they would have come with a more specific order. Professor Martinez says she's 20 minutes out," Sarah added. "She asked us not to mention her arrival to anyone else." The situation shifted dramatically when 3 local sheriffs' vehicles pulled up the driveway shortly before noon. Sheriff Dawson, a lifelong resident who had known William Peterson well, approached with a decidedly unofficial demeanor. "Jim," he nodded to Harris. "Michael, got a call about a disturbance." "Out here." "There's no disturbance, Sheriff," Thornton interjected smoothly. "We're conducting authorized historical preservation under a court order." Dawson gave him a measuring look. "Wasn't talking to you, Mr. Thornton." He turned back to Michael. "Your grandfather was my scout leader 30 years ago, taught half this county how to tie knots and respect nature. If there's something going on with his property, I'd like to hear it from his grandson." Michael explained the situation concisely, including the sudden acceleration of the timeline and suspicious behavior of Thornton's team. Sheriff Dawson reviewed the court order with growing skepticism. "This authorizes documentation, not removal," he confirmed. "And it specifically references military historical artifacts, not personal effects." He looked to Thornton. "Your team needs to confine activities to potential historical items only, with Mr. Peterson present during any examination." "Sheriff, this is a matter of national historical significance," Thornton began. "Maybe so," Dawson interrupted, "but it's in my jurisdiction on the property of a respected community member. We'll follow proper procedure." He turned back to Michael. "I'll have Deputy Collins remain on site to ensure everyone follows the rules." This official presence visibly frustrated Thornton, who pulled Caldwell aside for an intense, whispered conversation. Meanwhile, a modest sedan pulled up the driveway, and a diminutive woman in her 60s emerged, carrying a battered leather briefcase. "Professor Martinez," Sarah greeted her, making introductions to Michael and Harris. Eleanor Martinez had the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades fighting institutional battles. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her penetrating gaze immediately assessed the situation. "William Peterson's grandson," she said, grasping Michael's hand firmly. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man. I've been researching Operation Blackbird for 30 years, despite considerable institutional resistance, including from the Riverview Historical Foundation." Michael asked quietly. "Especially from them," she confirmed. "The foundation was established by returning officers who participated in Operation Blackbird, ostensibly to preserve military history. Their actual purpose was controlling which aspects of that history became public." When Thornton noticed Martinez's arrival, his reaction was immediate and revealing. "This is a restricted historical assessment," he called, striding toward them. "Civilians without authorization need to leave the premises." Professor Martinez regarded him calmly. "Maxwell Thornton, I believe we last crossed paths at the Department of Defense Archives hearing in 2018. You were quite determined to keep certain OSS operational records classified beyond their scheduled declassification. Date. Professor Martinez has my permission to be here as a historical consultant," Michael stated firmly. "Given your interest in my grandfather's military history, her expertise seems relevant." Sheriff Dawson backed Michael's position. "The property owner determines who has access, Mr. Thornton. Your court order doesn't supersede that basic right." With the sheriff present and Martinez's arrival shifting the power dynamics, Thornton reluctantly retreated to confer with his team, who had been systematically documenting the main barn area all morning. During this temporary respite, Michael, Sarah, Harris, and Martinez gathered in the farmhouse kitchen to compare notes and develop a strategy. Michael quietly recounted their discovery of the hidden chamber and his grandfather's letter. William finally decided to reveal everything. Martinez murmured, examining photographs of the documents on Michael's phone. These records could fundamentally change our understanding of post-war technological development. The Foundation clearly wants to control that narrative, Sarah observed, or suppress it entirely, Martinez added grimly. Operation Blackbird recovered experimental technologies that shouldn't have existed in 1945, advanced computing concepts, theoretical physics applications, medical research. Some of these findings were quietly incorporated into American research programs without attribution or public acknowledgement. And my grandfather documented everything, Michael concluded. William was the operations records officer, Martinez explained. When certain officials began sanitizing the official record, he created his own. For 70 years, the Foundation has suspected these documents existed but couldn't locate them, until Grandpa's death triggered something, Michael mused. Harris nodded thoughtfully. William updated his will 3 months before he passed, specifically leaving everything to you, Michael. Perhaps someone monitored these changes. We need to secure these records before Thornton finds them, Martinez urged. Historical truth belongs to everyone, not just those powerful enough to control it. Michael looked out the window toward the barn, where Thornton's team continued their methodical work. But how do we get the trunk out with them watching every move? We need to create a diversion, Sheriff Dawson said unexpectedly, his weathered face thoughtful as he peered through the kitchen window at Thornton's team. Something that draws their attention elsewhere while giving you access to the hidden room. The group turned to the sheriff in surprise. Don't look so shocked, Dawson continued. William Peterson was more than just my scout leader. He helped me get through college when my family couldn't afford it. Never asked for recognition, just made it happen. If he kept these records hidden for 7 decades, he had good reason. Martinez nodded appreciatively. A diversion could work, but it would need to be compelling enough to draw the entire team away, including their security personnel. What about a secondary discovery, Sarah suggested. Something significant enough to capture their attention, but ultimately less important than the trunk. Michael's eyes widened. Grandpa's workshop in the back of the farmhouse. He converted it from an old summer kitchen. There are footlockers of military memorabilia there, uniforms, medals, photographs, all the things you'd expect a veteran to keep. Perfectly legitimate historical items, Harris noted. Items that would justify the Foundation's interest without revealing the existence of the hidden records. And if they discovered these items while executing their court order, Martinez began, they'd be legally obligated to document them, Harris finished. Especially with a law enforcement witness present. Sheriff Dawson smiled slightly. I've always been interested in local military history. Might need to supervise such a significant find personally. The group quickly formulated their plan. Sheriff Dawson would notice one of Thornton's team members approaching the detached workshop behind the house, a reasonable action under their broad court order, but one that would require Michael's supervision as property owner. Michael would reluctantly reveal the military memorabilia, creating legitimate excitement that would draw the entire team's attention. Meanwhile, Michael continued, Sarah and Professor Martinez can access the hidden room through the root cellar entrance. Root cellar entrance? Martinez questioned. Michael smiled. Something I remembered from childhood. The hidden room has 2 access points. The trapdoor inside the north room and an old tunnel connecting to the farmhouse root cellar. Grandpa showed me once when I was about 10, swearing me to secrecy. Said it was a family escape route from Prohibition days. I'd completely forgotten until seeing his letter. William always thought several moves ahead, Martinez said admiringly. 20 minutes later, the plan was in motion. Sheriff Dawson approached Thornton with practiced casualness. "One of your people is checking out the old summer kitchen building. That area wasn't specified in your order. We have authorization for all structures," Thornton replied dismissively. "Perhaps," Dawson countered, "but proper procedure requires the property owner's presence during any search. Michael should accompany your team member." Reluctantly, Thornton agreed, and Michael led a preservation specialist toward the weathered outbuilding behind the farmhouse. Inside, beneath tarps and decades of accumulated dust, stood 3 military footlockers marked with his grandfather's name and service number. "These appear to be personal military effects," Michael explained, making a show of reluctance. "My grandfather's uniforms and memorabilia." The specialist's excitement was genuine. She immediately radioed Thornton, who arrived minutes later with Caldwell and 2 team members in tow. "These should have been disclosed immediately," Thornton admonished, already examining the first footlocker. "They're family heirlooms," Michael responded defensively, "not historical artifacts for public display." "Military service items of a decorated veteran absolutely qualify as historical artifacts," Caldwell countered, carefully lifting a dress uniform from the footlocker, "especially from someone connected to Operation Blackbird." Sheriff Dawson, playing his part perfectly, showed great interest. "William never mentioned being part of any special operations. Always said he was just a regular soldier doing his duty. Many operatives maintained that cover story throughout their lives," Thornton explained, warming to his role as historical expert. Operation Blackbird personnel were sworn to secrecy. As predicted, the discovery created legitimate excitement. The preservation team began proper documentation procedures, photographing and cataloging each item. Michael noted with satisfaction that even the security personnel had drifted toward the workshop, drawn by genuine curiosity about the military artifacts. Meanwhile, Sarah and Professor Martinez moved quickly through the farmhouse to the root cellar entrance concealed beneath an antique rug in the pantry. The narrow stone stairs led to a musty underground space where preserved foods had once been stored. "William showed me this place once," Martinez whispered, as they searched for the tunnel entrance. "Years ago, when I first began researching Operation Blackbird, he hinted that he had evidence but never revealed its location." Sarah's preservationist training helped her identify the disguised doorway, a section of stone wall with mortar patterns subtly different from its surroundings. A gentle push on the correct stone caused a section to swing inward, revealing a low, narrow passage. "Prohibition-era smuggling tunnel," Sarah noted professionally, "common in rural properties that produced illegal spirits. Your grandfather maintained it beautifully. The tunnel stretched approximately 30 feet, requiring them to crouch as they moved carefully through the confined space. It emerged through a disguised panel in the floor of the hidden room beneath the north section of the barn." "Remarkable," Martinez breathed as she surveyed the space. "William created a perfect, secure archive." They quickly located the trunk, but faced an immediate challenge. Its size made transport through the narrow tunnel impossible. "We'll have to transfer the contents," Sarah decided, unfolding the collapsible document cases she'd brought in her preservationist's bag. "Archival quality, acid-free containers. Not ideal, but they'll protect the documents during transport." Working methodically, they began transferring the meticulously organized papers into the protective folders. Martinez occasionally paused to examine particularly significant documents, her academic's hands trembling with the historical importance of what she was holding. "This changes everything," she whispered, reviewing a technical schematic. "Advanced computing concepts that weren't developed until the 1960s, documented here in 1945. And here, evidence of the scientists who were secretly brought to America, their Nazi connections deliberately obscured. "Isn't that Operation Paperclip?" Sarah asked, carefully packing photographs. Paperclip became the sanitized public version, Martinez explained. Blackbird preceded it, less discriminating, less documented, and far more controversial in terms of which scientists were extracted and what research was continued. As they worked, Martinez provided context that made the document's significance clear. Operation Blackbird had recovered technologies and research too advanced or controversial for public acknowledgement. Rather than destroying these materials, certain American officials had secretly preserved them, creating carefully sanitized cover stories for their integration into post-war research programs. William Peterson and 3 other operatives objected to this approach, Martinez explained. They believed the American people deserved to know the truth, particularly about technologies derived from unconscionable Nazi experiments. When they pushed for transparency, they were threatened with treason charges under national security provisions. "So my grandfather smuggled out his own records," Sarah surmised. As the unit's documentation officer, he had created duplicate records throughout the operation, standard procedure in case primary documentation was destroyed. When he realized the official records were being sanitized, he secured his copies before returning to America. They had nearly finished transferring the documents when they heard footsteps overhead. Someone had entered the north room. "They've expanded their search," Sarah whispered, hastily securing the remaining folders. Martinez nodded toward the tunnel. "Go now, with what we've packaged. I'll finish and follow." Sarah hesitated, but the professor's determined expression brooked no argument. Gathering the document cases, she slipped into the tunnel, pulling the concealed door nearly closed behind her. In the workshop, Michael was carefully prolonging the documentation process, asking detailed questions about preservation methods and historical significance that required lengthy explanations from Caldwell. He checked his watch discreetly. Sarah and Martinez had been gone nearly 40 minutes, longer than anticipated. His concern grew when one of the security personnel approached Thornton and whispered something that caused the Foundation chairman's expression to harden. "Mr. Peterson," Thornton announced abruptly, "one of my team members reports movement in the north section of the barn. Since you expressed structural safety concerns, perhaps we should investigate immediately." Michael's mind raced. "Of course," he replied, maintaining an outwardly calm demeanor. "Though I'm surprised anyone would enter after my warnings. Let me accompany you to ensure safety." As they crossed the yard toward the barn, Michael desperately hoped Sarah had completed their mission. The group entered the main barn area to find one of Thornton's security teams standing alertly by the north room door. "Movement and light detected inside, sir," the man reported. "Door remains locked." "Mr. Peterson, your keys, please," Thornton demanded. With no plausible reason to refuse, Michael unlocked the door. Inside, they found Professor Martinez examining the filing cabinets, a flashlight in hand. "Professor," Thornton's voice carried dangerous undertones. "This is a restricted area." Martinez turned calmly. "Mr. Thornton, I was just admiring William Peterson's remarkable organization system. As a historical consultant for Michael, I'm evaluating items of potential academic interest." "How did you enter a locked room?" Thornton demanded. "Michael provided keys before joining you at the workshop," she replied smoothly. "We agreed I would assess this area while he assisted your team." Michael nodded confirmation, relieved that Martinez had established a plausible explanation. He scanned the room quickly. The trapdoor remained undetectable, with a heavy workbench now positioned more centrally above it. Thornton clearly suspected something, but couldn't identify what had triggered his security team's alert. "Your court. Order specifies documentation of historical artifacts," Martinez continued, gesturing toward the filing cabinets. These appear to contain William's woodworking designs, beautiful craftsmanship, but hardly military historical records. She opened a drawer, revealing meticulously organized furniture designs, exactly as Michael had claimed earlier. Thornton's frustration was palpable as he directed his team to search the room. They examined the filing cabinets, shelving units, and workbenches, but found nothing to justify their suspicions. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Thornton?" Sheriff Dawson asked from the doorway. "Ms. Caldwell suggested your interest was in William's military memorabilia, which we've located in the workshop. Our information indicates additional materials," Thornton replied stiffly. "What specific materials?" Dawson pressed. "Your court order requires reasonable specificity." As Thornton struggled to respond without revealing too much, Michael noticed Martinez subtly position herself between the search team and the concealed trapdoor. Her confidence suggested Sarah had successfully removed the documents. "Perhaps we should return to documenting the confirmed historical items," Caldwell suggested diplomatically, clearly uncomfortable with Thornton's increasingly transparent agenda. "The uniforms and service medals provide significant historical context." Reluctantly, Thornton agreed, but not before fixing Martinez with a knowing look. "This isn't over, Professor. Some matters of historical record are best left to official institutions. History belongs to everyone, Mr. Thornton," she replied evenly, "especially the parts powerful people find inconvenient." Back at the farmhouse, Harris was helping Sarah organize the rescued documents when the group returned. The attorney had prepared blank preservation forms that gave the appearance of official documentation work, providing cover for their activities. "Remarkable collections," Harris commented loudly as they entered. "William's service photographs are particularly well preserved." Michael quickly assessed the situation. The document cases were disguised among legitimate preservation materials, and Sarah gave him a subtle nod, confirming success. "Sheriff Dawson," Thornton began, "I have reason to believe unauthorized removal of historical materials may be occurring." Dawson regarded him steadily. "Do you have evidence of specific items being removed against court order provisions?" "Professor Martinez was found in a secured area. With my explicit permission," Michael interjected. "As property owner, I'm entitled to catalog my grandfather's possessions with qualified assistance." Harris reinforced this position. "The court order grants documentation rights, not seizure authority. Everything here is being properly documented, using standard preservation protocols." Thornton's frustration mounted as he realized his legal position was weakening. "The Foundation has jurisdiction over military historical artifacts. After proper documentation and verification," Harris corrected. "Judge Harlow has granted my emergency motion restricting removal of any items pending a full hearing next week. His order supersedes your emergency preservation authorization." Thornton paced the farmhouse kitchen, his composure cracking as legal control slipped through his fingers. Caldwell watched with growing discomfort, clearly reassessing her involvement in the Foundation's aggressive tactics. "This delay jeopardizes proper preservation," Thornton insisted, though his concern for historical artifacts had become transparently secondary to his actual agenda. "The court disagrees," Harris replied calmly, displaying Judge Harlow's order on his tablet. "All items will remain on site under joint supervision until the formal hearing. Sheriff Dawson has agreed to post a deputy to ensure compliance by all parties." Thornton's gaze shifted to the document cases on the table. "What materials are you currently processing?" Sarah answered professionally. "Photographs and personal correspondence. Standard documentation practice separates items by medium and preservation needs." She opened a folder containing exactly what she described: William Peterson's personal photographs and letters, legitimately part of his estate and strategically placed atop the concealed Operation Blackbird documents. Sheriff Dawson's deputy arrived, a young officer who positioned herself on the porch with clear view of both the barn and farmhouse. Her presence created an official buffer that prevented Thornton from taking more aggressive action. "This situation is far from resolved," Thornton warned as he reluctantly prepared to depart. "The Foundation will present compelling evidence at the hearing regarding William Peterson's unauthorized possession of government materials." "We welcome that discussion," Martinez responded with professional confidence. "I'm particularly interested in examining the Foundation's legal standing to claim dominion over these supposed materials, given its status as a private organization rather than a government entity." After extracting promises that nothing would be removed from the property, Thornton and his team finally departed, leaving Caldwell behind to coordinate documentation procedures, though her uncomfortable expression suggested monitoring duty rather than preservation interest. Once relative privacy was established, Michael, Sarah, Martinez and Harris gathered in William's study at the back of the farmhouse, well away from Caldwell's watchful presence. "We've successfully recovered approximately 70% of the documents," Martinez reported in hushed tones. "The most critical materials are secure, but significant items remain in the trunk. We need to extract the rest before the hearing," Michael said. "Thornton will return with reinforcements and more specific legal authority." Harris nodded grimly. "Agreed. Once he reveals the true nature of what he's seeking, he'll likely secure federal involvement based on national security claims, however dubious." "Why haven't they done that already?" Sarah wondered. "Because officially, Operation Blackbird doesn't exist," Martinez explained. "The Foundation has maintained dual objectives for decades, publicly celebrating sanctioned military history while privately controlling access to unsanctioned operations. They can't invoke federal authority without exposing the operation's existence, which is exactly what these documents do," Michael concluded, gesturing to the hidden files. "So what's our next move?" Martinez's expression turned resolute. "Authentication and strategic disclosure. I have contacts at several universities and reputable media outlets. Once these documents are verified by multiple independent experts, the Foundation loses its ability to suppress them. That requires getting the remaining materials out of the barn," Michael reminded her, "and maintaining chain of custody documentation that establishes your grandfather's legitimate ownership," Harris added. "We need to demonstrate he had legal authority to possess these records in his role as unit documentation officer." Sarah, who had been examining the recovered papers, looked up suddenly. "I think I may have found something." She carefully extracted a yellowed official document. This appears to be William Peterson's original orders, signed by General Marshall himself, authorizing him to maintain comprehensive documentation of all field operations for historical and accountability purposes. Martinez examined the document with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary. Combined with William's letter explaining his reasons for preserving these records, it establishes his actions as consistent with his official duties, not theft of government property, as Thornton will undoubtedly claim. Could we create a diversion that would allow access to the hidden room again?" Michael suggested. Sheriff Dawson, who had returned after seeing Thornton off the property, shook his head. "Too risky. Caldwell is specifically watching for unusual activity around the barn, and Thornton almost certainly has surveillance in place, despite withdrawing his team." "What about a legitimate reason to access the north room?" Sarah proposed. "Something preservation-related that even Caldwell couldn't reasonably oppose." Harris considered this. "The court order specifies documentation of historical artifacts. If we discovered evidence suggesting additional materials in that room— Water damage, Sarah said suddenly. As a preservation specialist, I've identified potential moisture damage to wooden artifacts that requires immediate assessment of all storage areas, including the north room. Caldwell would have to allow that inspection under preservation protocols. Martinez nodded. Especially with witnesses present, they refined the plan carefully. Sarah would discover water staining on one of William's military photographs, requiring urgent assessment of all storage locations. Michael would insist on inspecting the barn's roof and interior spaces for leaks, with Harris present as his legal representative. Meanwhile, Dawson added, I'll create a legitimate distraction for Caldwell by requesting her expertise on proper handling protocols for Williams service medals. Deputy Collins can assist, keeping Caldwell occupied while you access the north room. The plan was set in motion the following morning. Sarah convincingly identified water damage on several photographs, expressing professional concern about preservation conditions. Caldwell, who genuinely valued proper artifact preservation, couldn't reasonably object to a structural assessment. These water stains appear recent, Sarah explained, showing Caldwell the affected photographs. We need to identify the source immediately before additional materials are damaged. While Michael, Sarah, and Harris headed to the barn to check for roof leaks, Sheriff Dawson engaged Caldwell in a detailed discussion about military medal preservation, strategically positioning her away from the north room entrance. Inside the hidden chamber, they worked with practiced efficiency, transferring the remaining documents into preservation folders. The most challenging item was a sealed metal container at the bottom of the trunk, too large for inconspicuous removal. We'll have to leave this for now, Michael decided reluctantly. Focus on the documents. Sarah carefully photographed the container's exterior and visible markings before resealing the trunk. Based on the labeling, it appears to contain technical components or prototype materials, she noted. Possibly the actual technology your grandfather was documenting. They had nearly completed their extraction when raised voices from the main barn area signaled trouble. Through the north room door, they could hear Thornton arguing with Deputy Collins. This is an active investigation site, Thornton was insisting. I have authorization from federal authorities to secure specific materials. Any new orders would have been communicated through proper channels, Collins responded firmly. Until I receive instructions from Sheriff Dawson, the court's preservation order remains in effect. Michael quickly secured the trap door while Sarah and Harris gathered. The document cases. They emerged from the north room with deliberate casualness, Sarah carrying preservation supplies and Michael some basic woodworking tools. Mr. Thornton, Michael acknowledged with forced politeness. Another unexpected visit. Thornton held up a document bearing federal letterhead. This supersedes the local court order. Department of Defense authorization to secure classified materials illegally removed from military control. Harris examined the document skeptically. This authorization is remarkably vague, referencing potentially classified historical documentation. Without specificity, it appears to be a preliminary assessment authorization, not a seizure order. The determination of classification status can only be made upon inspection, Thornton countered. My team is authorized to conduct that inspection immediately. As if on cue, 3 vehicles pulled into the driveway, carrying men whose bearing suggested military or intelligence backgrounds, despite their civilian clothing. Sheriff Dawson arrived moments later, alerted by Deputy Collins's urgent call. Mr. Thornton, any federal action in my jurisdiction requires proper notification through official channels. I've received no such communication. This situation involves national security matters beyond local authority, Thornton replied dismissively. My team will proceed with their assessment, The confrontation escalated as Dawson refused to acknowledge Thornton's questionable authorization without verification from his department's federal liaison. Harris supported this position, citing specific precedents requiring proper jurisdictional protocols, even in national security matters. During this tense standoff, Martinez quietly supervised Sarah's continued documentation of the newly recovered materials, establishing clear chain of custody records that would prove crucial later. Sheriff, one of Thornton's new team members, stepped forward, presenting credentials. James Mercer, Department of Defense Historical Review Division. We're conducting a preliminary assessment of potentially sensitive historical materials. No items will be removed without proper authorization. Dawson examined the credentials carefully. These appear legitimate, but I'll need to verify through official channels. Of course, Mercer agreed reasonably, his professional approach noticeably different from Thornton's aggressive tactics. We understand proper procedure must be followed. While Dawson made his verification call, Michael noticed Mercer surveying the barn with the practiced eye of someone looking for architectural anomalies. Exactly the kind that might reveal hidden spaces. Martinez approached Mercer directly. Your Historical Review Division has consistently blocked declassification of Operation Blackbird records. Perhaps you could explain the historical justification for maintaining secrecy about an operation that ended 75 years ago. Mercer's expression revealed nothing, but his response was telling. Professor Martinez, your persistence in pursuing unauthorized research into classified operations continues to create security concerns. Classified operations with direct connections to the development of technologies still in use today, Martinez countered. Technologies derived from research with deeply troubling ethical origins. Their exchange was interrupted by Sheriff Dawson's return. I've confirmed Mr. Mercer's credentials and authority to conduct a preliminary assessment. However, removal of any materials still requires specific court approval. Thornton appeared ready to object, but Mercer nodded acceptance. We'll conduct our assessment within those parameters. The next several hours devolved into a tense standoff disguised as professional cooperation. Mercer's team methodically examined the barn, paying particular attention to the north room, while Michael, Sarah, and Martinez continued legitimate documentation work in the farmhouse under Harris's watchful guidance. They'll find the hidden room eventually, Michael murmured as they catalogued the recovered documents. Professionals like that will recognize the structural inconsistencies. Which is why we need to complete authentication and secure independent verification immediately, Martinez replied. Once multiple academic institutions have documented these materials, suppression becomes virtually impossible. Harris, who had been making calls throughout the morning, brought promising news. Judge Harlow has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning regarding the competing jurisdictional claims. Meanwhile, he's issued a temporary restraining order preventing removal of any materials until jurisdictional authority is established. Martinez nodded with satisfaction. I've arranged for 3 independent historians to meet us this evening, specialists in military documentation, OSS operations, and post-war technology development. Once they verify these materials, we'll have credible expert testimony for the hearing. By late afternoon, Mercer's team had completed their initial assessment of the barn without discovering the hidden chamber, though their careful measurements suggested they suspected structural anomalies. They established a monitoring presence, but didn't attempt to remove any items, maintaining the uneasy detente. As darkness fell, Martinez's academic colleagues began arriving, distinguished professors whose reputations lent immediate credibility to the authentication process. They gathered in William's study, examining the documents with growing amazement. These operational records match known OSS protocols perfectly, confirmed Dr. Leonard Jeffries, a leading expert on intelligence operations. The authorization signatures, document numbering systems, and communication codes are consistent with verified materials from that period. Dr. Sophia Williams, who specialized in post-war technology development, examined the technical schematics with particular interest. These computing concepts predate public research by at least 15 years. The similarities to early DARPA projects are unmistakable, though those connections were never acknowledged. The third expert, Dr. Richard Chen, focused on William Peterson's personal records, explaining his decision to preserve the documentation. His actions show remarkable moral courage. He wasn't stealing government property. He was preserving historical truth that others were actively suppressing. Their professional assessment transformed the recovered documents from contested materials to historically significant records with verified provenance. Harris documented their findings in affidavits for the next day's hearing, establishing a formal academic record that would be difficult for Thornton's team to discredit. Around midnight, as the experts continued their work, Sheriff Dawson arrived with alarming news. Thornton's people are bringing in ground-penetrating radar equipment tomorrow morning. They've obtained supplemental authorization for non-invasive structural assessment of the entire property. They're looking for the hidden chamber, Michael realized. And with that equipment, they'll find it. More importantly, Martinez added, they'll discover the remaining materials we couldn't extract, particularly that sealed container. Sarah, who had been compiling preservation documentation, looked up sharply. The container's markings matched project codes referenced in several technical documents. Based on context, it may contain prototype components or experimental materials. We need to recover that container before Thornton's team finds it, Michael declared, pacing the study floor. Once they bring in that scanning equipment, the hidden chamber will be exposed. Dr. Williams studied the photographs Sarah had taken of the sealed metal container. Based on these markings and the accompanying documentation, this likely contains prototype components from Project Helix, a theoretical computing system decades ahead of its time, which explains the Foundation's determination, Martinez added. If this contains what I suspect, it proves that several breakthrough American technologies weren't independent developments, but derived directly from Blackbird acquisitions. Sheriff Dawson checked his watch. Thornton's team has established a perimeter around the barn, but appears to be waiting for their equipment in the morning. We have a narrow window if we're going to retrieve that container. But how? Michael asked. They're watching every approach to the barn. Sarah had been studying the property survey maps spread across William's desk. What about the tunnel? Does it only connect to the root cellar, or could there be other access points? Michael frowned. Grandpa only showed me the root cellar connection. But if it was originally built for Prohibition's smuggling, there might be an external entrance, Harris finished. Bootleggers typically created multiple escape routes. The group moved to the basement, where Dawson used specialized equipment to scan the foundation walls. After 20 minutes of careful examination, they discovered a sealed doorway behind a rack of preserved farm equipment. Classic concealment technique, Dawson observed. The door was plastered over, but the material density is different. Careful. Work with hand tools revealed an old wooden door reinforced with metal bands. The hinges protested, but yielded to oil and persistence, revealing a narrow tunnel that angled away from the house. This doesn't lead toward the barn, Michael noted with disappointment. No, Sarah agreed, consulting the property maps. Based on the angle, it appears to head toward the old spring house? Michael's eyes widened with recognition. Of course. The spring house is situated between the house and barn. It would be the perfect midpoint for a smuggling operation. With flashlights in hand, they followed the low tunnel approximately 60 feet until it opened into a small underground chamber beneath the spring house. Decades of disuse had left the space dusty, but remarkably intact. 3 additional tunnel entrances branched from this central hub, a distribution point, Sarah explained. Common in sophisticated bootlegging operations, multiple pathways to move product or escape if necessary. And one of them must connect to the barn tunnel, Michael reasoned. After careful examination, they identified the correct passage. Unlike the other tunnels, this one showed subtle signs of more recent maintenance. The support beams were newer, the earthen floor more firmly packed. This has been used within the past few decades, Sarah noted professionally. Not regularly, but maintained for accessibility. Grandpa keeping his options open, Michael said with growing admiration for his grandfather's foresight. The tunnel extended another 70 feet before connecting to a previously unnoticed side entrance to the hidden chamber beneath the barn. Inside, they found the trunk exactly as they had left it, the sealed metal container still nestled at the bottom. Incredible preservation, Dr. Chen remarked, examining the container. Military-grade sealing technology from the 1940s, still intact. We need to document this exactly as we found it, Martinez instructed, complete with chain of custody verification before moving it. The academics methodically photographed and recorded the container's position, markings, and condition before carefully transferring it to a specialized transport case that Dr. Williams had brought. Meanwhile, Sheriff Dawson kept communication with Deputy Collins, who was monitoring Thornton's team from a discreet distance. They've brought in additional personnel, Dawson reported, setting up equipment around the property perimeter. Likely electronic surveillance. We need to complete this quickly. Once properly documented, they carefully transported the container through the tunnel network back to the farmhouse basement. There, Dr. Williams conducted a preliminary examination using portable equipment she had brought for authentication purposes. The container's integrity hasn't been compromised, she confirmed. Whatever's inside has been perfectly preserved in an inert atmosphere. Based on the external markers, it contains prototype computational components and accompanying research documentation. Martinez nodded with satisfaction. With this secured and documented by independent experts, Thornton's justification for seizing these materials becomes significantly weaker. This isn't about national security, it's about controlling the historical narrative. By dawn, the authentication process was complete. The 3 academic experts had documented, verified, and provided sworn statements regarding the legitimacy and historical significance of William Peterson's Operation Blackbird archives. Harris had prepared comprehensive legal arguments establishing William's authority to maintain these records and Michael's rightful inheritance of them. As predicted, Thornton's team arrived with ground-penetrating radar equipment shortly after sunrise. Michael, now operating from a position of documented evidence and expert testimony, met them at the property line with Harris and Sheriff Dawson. "Mr. Thornton," Michael greeted him formally. "Before you proceed, you should know that we've completed comprehensive documentation of my grandfather's military records with independent academic verification. We'll be presenting this evidence at today's hearing." Thornton's confident expression faltered slightly. "Whatever materials you've found remain subject to national security review." "Interesting position," Harris interjected, "considering no government agency has officially acknowledged Operation Blackbird's existence. One cannot classify what officially doesn't exist. Classification status can be applied retroactively when national security interests are identified," countered James Mercer, stepping forward from Thornton's group. "Perhaps," Martinez replied, joining them with her colleagues, "but that argument becomes problematic when the materials in question have already been authenticated by multiple independent experts and entered into academic record." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "You've overstepped your authority, Professor." "On the contrary," Dr. Jeffries responded, "as historians, We have fulfilled our professional obligation to document significant historical materials through established academic protocols. The Preservation of Historical Records Act specifically protects such activities. This reference to established legal protection clearly surprised Thornton and Mercer, suggesting they had anticipated dealing with amateurs rather than knowledgeable professionals. Sheriff Dawson reinforced their position. As the local authority, I've witnessed and documented the chain of custody for these historical materials. Any attempt to seize them without proper judicial review would constitute interference with legitimate historical preservation. The standoff continued as both sides prepared for the hearing. Thornton's team proceeded with their ground-penetrating radar survey, eventually locating the hidden chamber as expected. Their discovery of the empty trunk prompted intense but ultimately futile demands to know where the contents had been moved. At the courthouse, Judge Harlow, a thoughtful jurist with 30 years on the bench, carefully reviewed the competing claims. The hearing room was tense as Thornton presented arguments for immediate federal custody of all materials related to Operation Blackbird, citing vague national security concerns without specific details. When Michael's team presented their case, the dynamic shifted dramatically. The academic experts provided compelling testimony about the historical significance of William Peterson's archives, while Harris established clear legal precedent for protecting historically important documentation from retroactive classification efforts. Most compelling was Martinez's presentation connecting specific technologies documented in Williams' records to later breakthroughs in American research programs, connections that had been deliberately obscured for decades. These records don't threaten national security, Martinez explained. They threaten a carefully constructed narrative about American technological development. William Peterson preserved these records because he believed the American people deserved to know the true origins of technologies that transformed our society. Judge Harlow, clearly troubled by the implications, questioned Thornton directly. Can you provide specific, actionable national security concerns that would justify suppressing historical documentation from 7 decades ago? Thornton's vague references to ongoing security implications and sensitive technological applications grew increasingly tenuous under the judge's persistent questioning. The turning point came when Dr. Williams presented her preliminary analysis of the sealed container's contents. Without opening it or compromising its integrity, she had conducted non-invasive scans that revealed its general contents. This contains prototype computational components that directly influenced what we now recognize as early digital technology, she testified. The documentation clearly establishes that these concepts were acquired during Operation Blackbird and subsequently integrated into American research programs under different origins. After 4 hours of testimony, Judge Harlow delivered his ruling. The court finds insufficient justification for federal seizure of these historical materials. Mr. Peterson, as rightful heir, maintains ownership with the following conditions. First, the sealed container must undergo proper scientific examination under joint academic and government supervision to ensure no hazardous materials are present. Second, all documentation must be professionally archived with appropriate historical context. Third, these materials must eventually be made accessible to qualified researchers and historians. Thornton's objections were overruled, though the judge acknowledged the government's right to review specific technical documents for legitimate national security concerns, a limited concession that nonetheless preserved the archive's historical integrity. As they left the courthouse, Martinez turned to Michael with evident satisfaction. Your grandfather would be proud. After 70 years, the truth he protected will finally be properly acknowledged. But what happens now? Michael asked. Thornton and the Foundation won't simply accept this ruling. No, They won't, Martinez agreed. Which is why we've already implemented the next phase of preservation. Back at the farmhouse, she explained that during the authentication process, her colleagues had created secure digital copies of all documents, distributed to multiple academic institutions, with instructions for simultaneous publication, if any. An attempt was made to seize the originals, dead man's switch protocol, Dr. Jeffries explained, a technique William would have appreciated. If Thornton moves against these archives again, the entire collection instantly becomes public record across multiple international institutions. In the days that followed, the implications of William Peterson's preserved records began to ripple through academic circles. Universities established research initiatives to analyze Operation Blackbird's impact on post-war technological development. Historical societies requested access to William's personal accounts of the operation. Technology museums expressed interest in eventually displaying the prototype components once proper scientific examination was complete. 2 weeks after the court ruling, Michael received an unexpected visitor. Harriet Caldwell arrived alone, her official museum director persona noticeably subdued. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Peterson," she began awkwardly. "When I first approached you about your grandfather's property, I genuinely believed we were preserving important military history. I didn't understand the Foundation's actual agenda until I saw how Thornton reacted to those documents." Her discomfort was palpable as she continued. "I've submitted my resignation from both the museum and the Foundation. As a historian, I cannot be associated with deliberate suppression of historical truth, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might be." Michael studied her carefully. "What will you do now?" "Return to academic work," she replied with newfound resolve. "There are many aspects of military history that deserve more honest examination. Your grandfather's records have inspired me to look more critically at accepted narratives." Her visit signaled a broader shift as news of the Operation Blackbird. Archives began to spread through professional circles. Several historical foundations issued statements distancing themselves from the Riverview Foundation's tactics. Academic journals announced special issues dedicated to examining previously suppressed aspects of post-war technology transfers. Thornton made one final attempt to regain control, approaching Michael with a substantial financial offer for exclusive rights to the archives, a transparent effort to purchase and contain the spreading historical reassessment. "My grandfather didn't preserve these records for 70 years so they could be locked away again," Michael told him firmly. "Their value isn't monetary, it's historical truth." As summer approached, Michael and Sarah began renovation work on the barn, transforming the north section into a proper archive with climate-controlled storage and research facilities. Universities established fellowship programs for scholars studying William Peterson's documentation, ensuring his preserved history would be thoroughly examined by generations of historians. The sealed container, after careful examination under the court-mandated protocols, yielded exactly what Martinez had suspected: prototype computational components incorporating concepts that wouldn't become standard in American technology for decades. Museums requested permission to display these artifacts with proper historical context, acknowledging their complex origins and William Peterson's role in preserving their true history. One evening, as Michael and Sarah sat on the farmhouse porch, watching fireflies rise from the fields William Peterson had tended for decades, Professor Martinez arrived with a special delivery, the first academic journal entirely dedicated to analyzing Operation Blackbird based on William's preserved records. "Your grandfather is listed as primary source and historical witness," she explained, presenting the journal to Michael. "His 70-year commitment to historical truth has finally been properly acknowledged." Michael ran his fingers over his grandfather's name on the cover. He never told me any of this. All those years, I just thought he was a simple farmer who'd served his country like millions of others. He was protecting you, Martinez replied gently. The men who created the foundation made it clear what would happen to anyone who spoke about Blackbird's real activities. William chose to preserve the truth while shielding his family from those threats. But he made sure I'd find it eventually. Michael realized. The keys, the maintenance of the hidden room, the letter, he set everything up so the truth would come out when he was gone. Martinez nodded. William Peterson understood something fundamental about history. It doesn't belong to governments or foundations or powerful interests. It belongs to everyone, especially those who come after us. He preserved these records not just as evidence of what happened, but as a gift to future generations who deserve to know their true technological heritage. As darkness settled over the old barn that had protected William Peterson's secrets for 7 decades, Michael felt a deeper connection to his grandfather than ever before. The weathered structure had been more than a simple agricultural building. It had been the guardian of historical truth, patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal secrets that powerful interests had worked generations to conceal. The barn stood as William Peterson's final testament, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage involve protecting truth for those who come after, even when personal recognition remains decades in the future. The media attention surrounding William Peterson's Operation Blackbird archives intensified throughout the summer months. Academic journals competed for exclusive features on different aspects of the collection, while documentary filmmakers approached Michael with proposals for telling his grandfather's remarkable story. The technological revelations sent ripples through historical and scientific communities alike, forcing reassessment of accepted narratives about America's post-war technological development. I never expected this level of interest, Michael admitted to Sarah as they sorted through the latest stack of interview requests and academic inquiries. Grandpa's story has struck a nerve far beyond what we anticipated. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It's not just about the technology or even Operation Blackbird itself. It's about the deliberate shaping of historical memory. Who controls the stories we tell about our past and why? Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Martinez, now a regular visitor as she coordinated the growing academic response to William's archives. She carried several newspapers and academic bulletins, her expression both troubled and determined. The Foundation is launching a counter-offensive, she announced, spreading the publications across the kitchen table. They've engaged several prominent historians to question the authenticity and significance of the Peterson archives. Michael scanned the articles with growing concern. While carefully avoiding direct accusations of forgery, the Foundation's sponsored historians raised doubts about contextual inconsistencies and questionable provenance in recently discovered Operation Blackbird materials. They're not denying the operation existed anymore, Martinez explained. That's become untenable given the evidence. Instead, they're attempting to position your grandfather as an unreliable narrator who misunderstood or misrepresented what he witnessed. Classic disinformation technique, commented Dr. Jeffries, who had joined their impromptu research team on sabbatical from his university position. When you can't suppress information outright, create enough doubt to dilute its impact. Most concerning was an opinion piece in a prominent historical journal, suggesting William Peterson had exaggerated his role in Operation Blackbird, characterizing him as a low-level documentation clerk whose access to sensitive operations would have been strictly limited. They're attacking Grandpa's credibility, Michael realized, anger rising in his voice, trying to dismiss him as unimportant so they can minimize what he preserved. It's tactically sound, Martinez acknowledged grimly. If they can successfully challenge William's access and authority, they create doubt about the authenticity of everything he documented. Sheriff Dawson arrived midway through their discussion, bringing unwelcome news from the local front. The Foundation has launched a community historical education initiative, he reported, established a local museum exhibit about Riverview County's military contributions with a prominent section about William Peterson. What are they saying about him? Michael asked warily, celebrating his conventional service record while subtly undermining his Blackbird connections. They've framed him as a dedicated soldier whose late-life confusion led to misinterpretation of his actual experiences. Dawson's disgust was evident. They're using his documented war record to discredit his undocumented work. The coordinated effort to undermine William Peterson's credibility was sophisticated and multifaceted. Academic challenges questioned the documentation's authenticity. Media pieces characterized the archives as interesting but historically limited. Local initiatives positioned William as a respected veteran whose memory had become unreliable in his later years. They're laying groundwork for dismissing the entire archive without directly challenging its existence, Dr. Chen observed, creating a narrative where the documents exist but cannot be trusted. Michael paced the kitchen, frustration building. How do we fight this? They have resources, connections, established academic platforms. We have truth, Martinez interrupted firmly, and something they don't expect. Additional evidence they don't know about yet. She opened her laptop, displaying a secure academic database. Since the initial discovery, we've been quietly conducting international archival research, seeking independent confirmation of William's documentation. The results have been remarkable. The screen showed correspondence from archives in Britain, France and Germany, each providing collaborative evidence that independently verified elements of William's records. British intelligence archives contained oblique references to an American operation matching Blackbird's timeline. French resistance records documented assistance provided to American operatives recovering technological materials from Nazi facilities. German post-war records noted unexplained removals from research facilities that aligned perfectly with William's documentation. None of these sources knew about the others, Martinez explained with satisfaction. Each independently confirms aspects of William's records from different perspectives. This pattern of confirmation across disconnected international archives makes fabrication practically impossible. Dr. Williams added another layer of verification. The prototype technology components have been authenticated by 3 separate engineering laboratories. The materials, manufacturing techniques, and design concepts are definitively from the 1940s, incorporating theoretical approaches that weren't publicly developed until decades later. This methodical accumulation of corroborating evidence had been proceeding quietly while the Foundation launched its public relations offensive. Martinez and her colleagues had strategically withheld these confirmations, building an irrefutable case while the Foundation committed to its undermining strategy. The timing of our response is crucial, Martinez emphasized. The Foundation expects us to react defensively to their credibility attacks. Instead, we'll release comprehensive authentication, evidence that makes their strategy backfire by highlighting their deliberate attempts at disinformation. The counter-strategy unfolded meticulously over the following weeks. Rather than directly engaging with the Foundation's credibility attacks, Michael authorized progressive disclosure of international archival evidence through respected academic channels. Each release precisely verified specific aspects of William's documentation, creating a mounting case for authenticity that became increasingly difficult to dismiss. British historian Margaret Phillips published findings from classified RAF intelligence archives showing coordination with an unnamed American unit pursuing advanced research materials in the exact regions and time frames documented in Williams' records. German industrial historian Hans Müller released documents from Bavarian research facilities, noting unauthorized removals of prototype computing equipment that matched the specifications in the Blackbird files. Most significantly, French resistance. Historian Jean Dupont published memoirs of resistance fighters who had guided American operatives to hidden research facilities, with one entry specifically mentioning the American photographer who documented everything, a clear reference to William's documentation role. The Foundation's attempt to dismiss William as a low-level clerk collapsed under this coordinated international verification. Rather than appearing as a lone, questionable source, Williams' archives now formed the central connecting point between multiple independently verified accounts. They expected us to become defensive about William's personal credibility, Martinez explained, as their strategy gained momentum. Instead, we've shifted the conversation to systemic verification across multiple countries and disciplines. The Foundation's response revealed growing desperation. Thornton gave a rare public interview suggesting the international archival materials had been misinterpreted and taken out of context. Vague accusations that failed to address the specific correlations with William's documentation. Michael found unexpected emotional resonance in this academic battle. Each verification of his grandfather's records deepened his understanding of the quiet, unassuming man who had taught him to fish and repair engines while carrying the weight of historical truth. He never sought recognition, Michael reflected. During a quiet moment with Sarah, he could have gone public decades ago, faced the consequences, and perhaps gained acknowledgement in his lifetime. Instead, he protected the truth and his family simultaneously, waiting for the right moment when the evidence could speak for itself. The most powerful validation came in an unexpected form. Dr. Jeffries, while presenting at an international intelligence history conference, was approached by an elderly attendee who identified himself as James Wilson, a former OSS operative. "I knew your Peterson," Wilson confirmed after reviewing photographs of William and selections from his records. "Quiet fellow, always with his cameras and notebooks. The brass called him the Shadow because he documented everything without drawing. Attention. Some of the scientists we extracted were uncomfortable with his recording, but he insisted everything needed proper documentation." Wilson's failing health had prompted his decision to finally acknowledge operations he'd kept secret for over 7 decades. His independent confirmation of William's role and methods, details that appeared nowhere in publicly available records, provided personal verification that transcended archival evidence. William was right about everything, Wilson testified in a formally recorded interview. The experimental technologies, the scientists with questionable backgrounds, the pressure to sanitize records, it all happened exactly as his documentation shows. Those of us who participated were given very clear warnings about the consequences of disclosure. This first-hand corroboration from a fellow operative devastated the Foundation's attempts to characterize William as confused or misinformed. Wilson's testimony, combined with the international archival evidence, created an unassailable case for the Peterson Archive's authenticity. 6 months after the initial discovery, the Smithsonian Institution approached Michael about establishing a permanent exhibition on Operation Blackbird, with William Peterson's documentation and preservation efforts as its centerpiece. The proposal included proper historical contextualization of both the operation itself and the decades-long effort to suppress its existence. Your grandfather's dedication to historical truth deserves national recognition, the Smithsonian's curator explained. not just for what he documented during the operation, but for his 70-year commitment to preserving that documentation against extraordinary pressure. The proposed exhibition would present the complex historical reality without simplistic judgments, acknowledging both the strategic imperatives that drove Operation Blackbird and the ethical questions raised by the sanitization of its historical record. Most importantly, it would honor William Peterson's remarkable commitment to ensuring future generations could access the unvarnished truth. Thornton made one final desperate attempt to maintain control of the narrative. The Foundation offered to establish a joint historical commission that would contextualize the Peterson archives within a broader historical framework, a transparent effort to dilute their impact through bureaucratic management. "They're still trying to control the story," Michael observed, declining the offer without hesitation. "They've just changed tactics from suppression to co-option." Martinez agreed. "The Foundation has operated on the principle that history belongs to those powerful enough to control its narration. William rejected that principle 70 years ago, and we honor his courage by continuing that rejection today." The academic validation of the Peterson archives catalyzed broader historical reassessment. Historians began re-examining previously accepted narratives about post-war technological development, identifying other instances where origins and influences had been obscured for political or strategic purposes. William's meticulous documentation provided a methodological template for this historical detective work, demonstrating how carefully preserved primary sources could challenge decades of historical sanitization. As autumn painted the Kentucky countryside in brilliant colors, Michael and Sarah completed renovation of the barn's north section, transforming it into a proper research facility where scholars could study the Peterson archives in their original context. The hidden chamber was preserved as a historical exhibit, allowing visitors to understand both the physical concealment and the moral courage required to maintain such secrets for decades. "We've created something Grandpa never could have imagined," Michael remarked as they prepared for the facility's official opening. "Not just preserving his records, but establishing a place where historical truth can be properly examined regardless of whose interests it challenges." The opening ceremony attracted historians, journalists, and military heritage specialists from across the country. Professor Martinez, now directing a dedicated research initiative on suppressed military history, delivered the keynote address focusing on William Peterson's unique contribution to historical preservation. William Peterson understood something fundamental about historical truth, she told the assembled guests. "It doesn't belong to governments or foundations or powerful interests. It belongs to humanity, to our collective understanding of how we develop the technologies and systems that shape our world." She gestured toward the preserved hidden chamber, visible through a specially designed viewing area. "This space represents both concealment and revelation, the physical manifestation of a moral decision to protect truth against powerful forces of suppression." For 70 years, William Peterson maintained this chamber and its contents, not for personal recognition, but because he believed future generations deserved to know their true technological heritage. The most moving moment came when several families descended from Operation Blackbird personnel attended the opening, including relatives of operatives mentioned in William's records whose contributions had been officially erased from historical records. For these families, the Peterson archives provided validation of service and sacrifice that had remained unacknowledged for generations. "My father never spoke about his wartime work," explained Catherine Reynolds, daughter of Lieutenant Edward Reynolds, extensively documented in William's records. "We knew he served, but official records showed only conventional assignments, William's documentation finally reveals the work he was prohibited from discussing even with his family. These personal connections transformed the academic validation into human recognition, acknowledging not just historical facts, but the lives and sacrifices of those who had been systematically written out of official narratives. Michael found himself increasingly drawn to his grandfather's personal journals, separate from the official Blackbird documentation. These private writings revealed William's decades-long moral struggle, his determination to preserve historical truth while protecting his family from potential repercussions. "I have chosen a path of patience rather than prominence," William had written in 1963. "The truth within these walls cannot emerge, while those who would suppress it remain in power. Perhaps in another generation, when their influence has waned, the full story can be told without endangering those I love." This commitment to delayed acknowledgement rather than immediate recognition embodied a particular kind of courage, the willingness to protect truth without witnessing its eventual validation. William had preserved these records, knowing he might never see them properly acknowledged, trusting future generations to complete the work he had begun. The Foundation's influence gradually diminished as the Peterson archives gained scholarly acceptance. Several academic board members resigned from Foundation positions, unwilling to associate with an organization increasingly recognized for historical suppression rather than preservation. Thornton himself eventually stepped down, citing health concerns that transparently masked his untenable position. 1 year after the initial discovery, Michael received an unexpected letter from a government declassification review committee. After evaluating the now widely distributed Peterson archives, the committee had authorized official declassification of previously sealed Operation Blackbird records, an implicit acknowledgement that William's preserved documentation had forced institutional transparency. "Your grandfather's preserved records have essentially rendered continued classification moot," the committee chair explained during a subsequent phone call. "When information is comprehensively documented in publicly available archives, maintaining classification of official records becomes procedurally pointless." This bureaucratic admission represented perhaps the most significant validation of William's 70-year commitment. The very institutions that had enforced secrecy now acknowledged that his preserved truth had ultimately prevailed against their machinery of historical suppression. As the research facility established in the renovated barn attracted increasing scholarly attention, Michael and Sarah found themselves becoming caretakers, not just of physical archives, but of William Peterson's legacy of principled historical preservation. "Grandpa created this legacy without ever knowing if it would succeed," Michael reflected during a quiet moment in the preserved hidden chamber. "He maintained these records for decades, ensuring they would survive even if he never saw them properly." "Acknowledged," Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's a special kind of courage, protecting truth without certainty of vindication." The sealed room beneath the weathered barn had protected more than documents and artifacts. It had preserved a fundamental belief that historical truth belongs not to those with power to control narratives, but to future generations seeking to understand their authentic heritage. William Peterson's 70-year act of preservation stood as testament to the proposition that sometimes the most important historical contributions come not from those who shape events, but from those who ensure events are truthfully remembered. 2 years after discovering his grandfather's hidden archives, Michael Peterson stood before a distinguished audience at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. as guest speaker for the opening of a special exhibition titled "Concealed History, Operation Blackbird, and America's Technological Heritage." He found himself the unlikely public face of historical revelation that continued to reshape understanding of post-war technological development. My grandfather never sought recognition, Michael began, surveying the crowded auditorium. William Peterson was a farmer who believed in stewardship of his land, his family, and most profoundly, of historical truth. He preserved these records, not for personal validation, but because he believed future generations deserved an honest accounting of their technological heritage. The exhibition represented the culmination of extensive academic validation and public interest in William Peterson's meticulously preserved documentation. Glass cases displayed carefully selected original materials from the Operation Blackbird archives, while interactive exhibits explained their significance within the broader context of post-war scientific advancement. Most striking was the full-scale reconstruction of William's hidden chamber, created with architectural precision based on measurements and photographs from the original space. Visitors could experience the physical environment where these historical records had been protected for 7 decades, complete with reproductions of the trunk, filing systems, and tunnel entrance. As Michael concluded his remarks, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that first discovery beneath the barn floorboards to this national recognition of his grandfather's moral courage. What had begun as a private family legacy had evolved into a public reckoning with historical narratives long taken for granted. Following the ceremony, Michael and Sarah toured the exhibition with Professor Martinez, whose academic persistence had been instrumental in establishing the Peterson Archive's legitimacy against formidable opposition. William would have appreciated the thoroughness, Martinez observed, examining a display that juxtaposed officially declassified Operation Blackbird documents with William's preserved originals, highlighting discrepancies that revealed systematic sanitization of the historical record. But would he have wanted this level of public attention, Michael wondered. Grandpa was intensely private. He wanted truth preserved, not personal recognition, Martinez replied thoughtfully. This exhibition honors that distinction by focusing on the historical significance of what he preserved, rather than celebrating him personally. The exhibition's impact extended far beyond academic circles. Technology companies acknowledged previously obscured origins of computing concepts. Engineering programs revised their historical curricula. Military historians reassessed narratives about post-war technological development that had excluded Operation Blackbird's contributions. Most significantly, the Peterson archives catalyzed broader examination of historical sanitization in other contexts. Researchers began identifying similar patterns across military, scientific, and political domains, instances where official narratives had been carefully constructed to obscure uncomfortable origins or questionable methods. William's documentation provided both evidence and methodology, Martinez explained during a panel discussion following the exhibition opening. He demonstrated how meticulous preservation of primary sources can eventually overcome even the most sophisticated institutional efforts to control historical narrative. This ripple effect was precisely what had motivated William's 7-decade commitment to preservation. His personal journals, now part of the archived collection, revealed a man who understood that his documentation potentially challenged more than just the specific history of Operation Blackbird. What we recovered extends beyond experimental technologies, he had written in 1957. The deliberate obscuring of historical origins represents a pattern that likely extends to other domains. By preserving these specific records, perhaps I provide future historians a template for identifying similar instances of historical sanitization. The exhibition drew unprecedented attendance, attracting visitors ranging from technology enthusiasts to ethics scholars. Educational programs developed around the Peterson archives explored not just the specific historical events, but broader questions about ownership of historical narrative, and institutional responsibility for historical accuracy. Sarah, whose architectural preservation background had proven crucial during the initial discovery, found herself increasingly involved in developing educational programs around the ethical dimensions of historical preservation. William Peterson's 70-year commitment raises profound questions about our relationship to historical truth, she explained to a group of university students touring the exhibition. He recognized that how we understand our technological past fundamentally shapes our approach to technological development in the present. The exhibition included a contemplation space where visitors could reflect on these ethical questions. Interactive displays invited them to consider who controls historical narrative. What responsibilities do individuals have when they possess knowledge that challenges official accounts? How does sanitized history affect contemporary decision-making? These philosophical dimensions transformed the Peterson archives from mere historical curiosity into a catalyst for deeper examination of the relationship between historical knowledge and contemporary ethics. William's personal moral choice to preserve uncomfortable truth despite institutional pressure resonated with visitors navigating complex ethical landscapes in their own professional contexts. Michael watched with amazement as his grandfather's private act of preservation evolved into public inspiration for ethical courage. Technology whistleblowers cited William's example when explaining their decisions to reveal questionable corporate practices. Government transparency advocates referenced the Peterson archives when arguing for reduced classification periods for historical documents. He never could have anticipated this broader impact, Michael remarked to Martinez as they observed visitors, engaging thoughtfully with the ethical dimensions exhibit. Grandpa was just trying to preserve specific historical truth about Operation Blackbird. Yet he understood the pattern it represented, Martinez replied. His journals show he recognized that the sanitization of Blackbird's history likely mirrored similar efforts in other domains. By preserving evidence of one such instance, he provided a template for recognizing others. The exhibition's 2-year run at the National Archives would be followed by an international tour, bringing William Peterson's preserved truth to audiences across Europe, including regions where Operation Blackbird had originally recovered the controversial technologies. European institutions had shown particular interest in exploring how these early computing concepts had influenced subsequent technological development on both sides of the Atlantic. After the opening ceremonies concluded, Michael and Sarah returned to the Kentucky farmhouse that remained their home despite the property's growing historical significance. The barn continued operating as a research facility, hosting scholars from around the world studying various aspects of the Peterson archives. William's workshop had been preserved as a memorial space, maintaining the personal dimension of this historically significant story. Sometimes I wonder what Grandpa would think of all this, Michael reflected as they sat on the farmhouse porch watching fireflies rise from the fields. The national exhibition, international scholars studying, his records, his name in history books, it's so different from the quiet life he lived. I think he'd be satisfied that the truth is finally acknowledged, Sarah suggested, not for personal recognition, but because that was always his objective, ensuring historical truth wouldn't remain permanently buried. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Chen, who had continued researching connections between Operation Blackbird technologies and subsequent scientific developments. His expression suggested significant news. We've identified another instance, he announced without preamble, joining them on the porch. The Peterson template worked exactly as your grandfather might have hoped. The Peterson template had emerged as shorthand for the methodological approach William had modeled, comparing sanitized official histories with primary source materials to identify patterns of deliberate historical revision. Researchers had begun applying this methodology across various domains where historical narratives seemed suspiciously tidy. The Prometheus Initiative, Dr. Chen continued, presenting his preliminary findings. Officially recorded as an independent American research program developing theoretical approaches to nuclear propulsion in the 1960s. Using your grandfather's methodological approach, we've identified compelling evidence that key theoretical concepts originated in Operation Blackbird acquisitions. This discovery represented exactly the pattern William had anticipated. The Operation Blackbird methodology of sanitizing technological origins had been replicated across other sensitive programs, creating historical narratives that obscured uncomfortable connections and questionable ethical decisions. Your grandfather predicted this, Chen noted, referencing specific passages from William's personal journals. He understood that Blackbird represented a template for managing problematic historical narratives, not an isolated incident. This validation of William's broader historical concerns reinforced the profound significance of his preservation efforts. He hadn't merely documented specific historical events, he had identified and preserved evidence of systematic approaches to historical sanitization that extended far beyond Operation Blackbird itself. The following morning brought another significant development. Deputy Director Elizabeth Morgan from the National Archives arrived unannounced, requesting a private meeting with Michael. Her institutional formality barely contained evident excitement, as she presented a leather portfolio containing official documentation. The President has authorized me to inform you that William Peterson will receive a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom, she announced. The citation acknowledges his extraordinary commitment to historical truth and moral courage in preserving critical documentation despite significant institutional pressure. The nation's highest civilian honor represented remarkable institutional acknowledgement of William's contribution, formal recognition that his preservation efforts had served fundamental national values despite challenging official narratives. The award ceremony would coincide with the international launch of the traveling exhibition, bringing presidential validation to William's long unacknowledged service. "There's something else," Morgan added, producing an official letter bearing the presidential seal. The White House is establishing the William Peterson Truth in Historical Documentation Initiative, a program supporting preservation of primary source materials that challenge incomplete or sanitized historical narratives. This institutional legacy transformed William's individual moral choice into established governmental policy. The initiative would provide resources and protection for archivists, historians, and individuals preserving documentation that contradicted official historical accounts, ensuring future William Petersons wouldn't face the isolation and pressure he had endured. Your grandfather's 70-year commitment has fundamentally changed how our institutions approach historical documentation, Morgan explained. The President believes this initiative honors not just what William preserved, but how he preserved it, his methodical documentation, physical preservation techniques, and ethical commitment to historical truth. Michael accepted these honors with complex emotions: pride in his grandfather's belated recognition, satisfaction that the truth had finally emerged, yet lingering sadness that William hadn't lived to witness this validation of his lifelong commitment. That evening, Michael visited the hidden chamber beneath the barn, now preserved as a historical site, but still maintaining the solemn atmosphere of a space where truth had been protected against formidable pressure. The empty trunk remained positioned exactly as they had found it, a physical testament to William Peterson's extraordinary commitment. sitting on the simple wooden bench where his grandfather had presumably contemplated his moral responsibilities. For decades, Michael found himself reflecting on the transformation of this once secret space. What had been hidden was now deliberately visible. What had been privately maintained was now publicly celebrated. The exhibition at the National Archives included an interactive element inviting visitors to share instances where they had personally witnessed historical narratives being sanitized or revised. The resulting contributions had been remarkable. Soldiers describing military events officially recorded differently from their experience. Scientists noting research origins obscured in official accounts. Government employees identifying institutional revision of inconvenient historical facts. William Peterson's preserved documentation had created space for these broader conversations about historical truth across domains far beyond Operation Blackbird itself. By demonstrating how one sanitized historical narrative could eventually be corrected through methodical preservation, he had provided both methodology and inspiration for addressing similar patterns elsewhere. Professor Martinez joined Michael in the preserved chamber, having arrived for scheduled research sessions with visiting scholars. "We've received another 10 applications for the William Peterson Fellowship," she reported. "Researchers proposing to apply his methodological approach to everything from pharmaceutical development histories to environmental policy documentation." The fellowship program, established through university partnerships, supported scholars using the Peterson template to examine potentially sanitized historical narratives across diverse domains. Recipients received access to the Peterson archives, methodological training, and legal support for navigating potential institutional resistance to historical reassessment. "Your grandfather preserved these specific records," Martinez observed, "but he also preserved something more fundamental, a methodology for recognizing and addressing historical sanitization. That methodology has become his most significant legacy." This methodological impact explained why William's story resonated far beyond the specific historical events he had documented. His preservation efforts provided a template for addressing fundamental questions about historical truth that transcended the particular technologies or operations detailed in his archives. As twilight deepened the shadows in the hidden chamber, Michael considered the journey from personal discovery to national recognition. What had begun as a family mystery had evolved into institutional acknowledgement of both specific historical truth and broader methodological approach to historical preservation. "He never expected recognition," Michael noted quietly. "Grandpa maintained these records for 70 years without any certainty they would ever be properly acknowledged." "That's what makes his commitment so remarkable," Martinez replied. "William Peterson preserved historical truth not for personal validation, but because he believed future generations deserved access to unvarnished history. He trusted that truth, properly preserved, would eventually emerge despite powerful interests working against it. This profound faith in the eventual triumph of properly preserved truth represented William Peterson's most enduring legacy, not just the specific historical records he had maintained, but his unwavering belief that methodical documentation could eventually overcome even the most sophisticated efforts at historical revision. The farmhouse and barn became known as the Peterson Center for Historical Truth, attracting thousands of visitors annually. On the 5th anniversary of the discovery, Michael stood in the preserved hidden chamber, now part of a living museum, where visitors could experience his grandfather's extraordinary commitment firsthand. "My grandfather believed that truth, properly preserved, would eventually overcome even the most determined efforts to bury it," Michael told a documentary filmmaker capturing the center's impact. "He never sought recognition. He sought vindication for historical accuracy." The President's remarks at the dedication ceremony perhaps captured William's legacy most eloquently. In an era of increasing concern about historical revisionism, William Peterson reminds us that individual moral courage can ultimately prevail against institutional power. One farmer's 70-year commitment to truth has transformed how we understand our technological heritage. That evening, as fireflies danced above the Kentucky fields William had tended for decades, Michael placed a framed photograph of his grandfather beside the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The simple farming tools William had used throughout his life now shared space with national honors, celebrating his extraordinary moral courage. The most powerful legacy isn't always the most visible, Michael reflected, watching visitors explore the grounds where his grandfather had preserved truth while living an outwardly ordinary life. Sometimes it's hidden beneath floorboards, waiting for the right moment to emerge. If this story of hidden truth and extraordinary courage resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We bring you powerful stories of ordinary people making extraordinary differences through moral courage and unwavering commitment. Next week, we'll explore another remarkable discovery that challenged historical narratives, the forgotten journals of a lighthouse keeper that rewrote maritime history. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss these incredible true stories of history's unsung heroes.